Well, as you know, my name is Nick Troiano, and I'm here this afternoon to talk about politics. So thanks for sticking around. It's relevant to us here at TEDxHendrix today because politics is nothing if not for an eternal and evolving struggle between us and them, specifically between the ruled and the rulers, as it pertains to who has power, how they get it, and what they use it for. Now, does anyone know the origin of the word politics? It actually comes from the Latin word meaning poly, meaning many, and tix, meaning blood-sucking creatures. But the politics that we'll talk about today is from the Greek word politikos, meaning of, by, or relating to the citizens. And when Aristotle talked about politics, he was referring to the virtuousness of public life, centered on the community and oriented to the highest good. And one question that has been asked throughout the ages, one that I'd like to concentrate on this afternoon, is what kind of political system, given this tension between us and them, the ruled and the rulers, can best serve that Aristotelian end of the common good? So first, I'd like to explore some political systems as we've seen in the human experience so far. Then specifically focus on the American system and why people think it has become dysfunctional of late. And lastly, end on some suggested solutions of how we might reorient our politics to where it once was and ought to be in service of the people. So to begin this exploration of past political systems, let's start with imagining what life would be like without one. This would be ruled by none, what Thomas Hobbes and others would call the state of nature. Can individuals pursue their own happiness yet still come together without government or authority to do what's necessary for the community? Now, you might be thinking, if society were filled with people like me, then the answer would be yes. But that's not the case. There are a lot of jerks out there. And so, if men were angels, no government would be necessary, said Madison. But since that's not the case, what Hobbes said is, in a state of total anarchy, life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And so we probably do need to have some authority. Otherwise, it's not us versus them, it's you versus everyone else. A sort of survival of the fittest. And if you think back to first grade recess, that's sort of not the most desirable situation for most people. So I think we can agree that some authority and thus some politics is necessary. For example, we can have rule by one. Now, we have an inclination against this type of system, but if you think about it, we can have a benevolent dictator make decisions in the best interest of the country. My mom and my high school principal come to mind. It works on a small level. But on a larger level, we know that absolute power corrupts absolutely, and we're more often than not left with oppressive leaders. So to mitigate against these lone lunatics, why not rule by some, where power is concentrated and passed down within a small group of people? Here too we can imagine this small group of people making decisions in the best interest of a political community. But more often than not, what we've seen is that they simply make decisions in the best interest of the ruling class. So the logical conclusion might be, well, why not rule by everyone? The problem with this, Athenian-style direct democracy, is that the will of the majority may sometimes overpower or undermine the rights of the minority. And the people in mass, uninformed, might make pretty bad decisions. You can just ask anyone from the state of California about that. So overall, what we see is rule by none, by one, by some, and everyone all seem theoretically possible, but on a practical level, doesn't work out very well often. And I think the reason is because of the tendencies of human nature. They all succumb to these tendencies. So the operative question is, how can we have a political system that coincides with human nature? And I think the genius of the American system is that our founders began with that question in mind. And in Federalist 57, Madison wrote, the first objective is to obtain for rulers those most virtuous and those most wise to discern what the common good is. And secondly, to put effectual precautions in place for keeping them virtuous while they have the public trust. And this was accomplished through a system of representative democracy that we're familiar with today, where we elect, through popular elections, we can obtain those wise rulers, and through a system of checks and balances and separation of powers, we can keep them virtuous while they're serving the public. As Madison also wrote, ambition must be made to counteract ambition. And so we have a system that truly serves the people. It's not us and them. It's we the people. It's built on this Enlightenment idea that we temporarily cede power to those whom we elect, who can govern in the best interests of everyone. In the history of our country, I think this has worked out pretty well for us. Consider in the past century, both major parties, majorities of both major parties came together to do big things. The establishment of Social Security, the construction of a national highway system, the enactment of civil rights legislation, welfare reform, the GI Bill. Again, majorities of both parties came together to move the country forward. And mid-last century, if you were to ask the average American, 70% would say that they trusted government to do the right thing some or most of the time. Well, that's changed. And what we've seen over the last 30 years is a pulling apart. Not only did the Republicans move further to the right and Democrats move further to the left, but there's been an ideological sorting out within these political parties, such that in National Journal analysis, which they do every year, they found in 2011, no Senate Republican compiled a voting record to the left of any Senate Democrat, and vice versa. And that was the second year in a row, but only the third time in 30 years of tracking. And in addition, 90% of members of both political parties will vote with their party on divided votes. So what we're seeing here is common ground disappearing, and with it, any hope of pursuing the common good. We have organized political minorities on both sides of the political spectrum that have essentially taken control of government and march within lockstep of each other. And what happens is we can't really do anything. We're stuck in gridlock, and confidence has collapsed in government. Nowadays, less than 25% of people trust government to do the right thing some or most of the time. And so I think we're realizing some of the worst fears of our founders. You know, it was James Madison who said, "There is nothing which I dread so much as the division of the republic into two great parties." In his farewell, Washington warned that factions would serve to enfeeble the public administration and agitate the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms. Is there any doubt in this room today that that is exactly what we see playing out? Every policy is analyzed, reported on, resolved, if it is, not in the best interest of the people, but in the best interest of us, being one party, or them, the other. And I think most Americans look at Washington and scratch their head, because when we go to work or we go to school, we have to work with other people to get things done, or else we'd fail or we'd be fired. But not so in Washington. That's just a recipe to get reelected. And so I think what we're seeing here is not the problem, but a symptom of the problem. The real pernicious divide is between the political class, who's intent on waging partisan warfare, and the people, who are so disgusted with it that they choose not to participate or even pay attention to it anymore. So what do I mean? Well, I should explain, why is an etch-a-sketch there? This is interesting. And many of you are laughing because you know why, because you pay attention. For about a week, that was what the media was consumed by. The presidential race was consumed by some comments that a Romney advisor made about an etch-a-sketch. And you would think that's what the whole country was paying attention to. But when Pew did a poll and asked people about this and how it impacted their feelings towards the candidates, over half of Americans had no idea what they were talking about. They thought etch-a-sketch was a toy that their children played with. So it shows the utter disconnect between the political class and the people. So who's in this political class? Well, first, we have the activists. These are the people on both sides who are really charged up. In 2010, but there aren't very many of them. In 2010, for example, 8% of people posted political content online. In 2008, 4% actually made financial contributions to any candidate, with 80% coming from less than 1% of the population. Also, less than 40% bothered even to vote in the presidential primary elections. And so in sum, what we have is activists, relatively small group of people, are the ones who are discussing the issues, supporting the candidates, and ultimately deciding who our leaders are going to be. And these are usually the people who care deeply about a particular issue or a particular ideology. There's a strong correlation between intensity of participation and extremity of views. And so these are the occupiers, the Tea Partiers, and also the professional class of people involved in the special interests and lobbies that have developed this ecosystem around our government today. And they're given a megaphone by the mainstream media, who, breathlessness and conflict and controversy drive ratings, and ratings drive profits. That's why we have a show called Hardball on MSNBC and a regular news program called Special Report on Fox News. And confidence in the media, too, has evaporated almost at the rate of confidence in our government. But for all the noise that the media makes and all the influence they have in driving debate, they have a very small audience. Only about 4 million people in the most watched shows on those networks I mentioned, compared to about 16 million tuned into American Idol this past week. The politicians, too, are part of this insular political class. they're more focused than ever on keeping their jobs, not doing their jobs, and they're staying in office for longer. Over the past 100 years, we've seen the number of congressmen who've served more than 16 years triple. And they're intent on a permanent campaign of not only their own reelection, but maximizing power for their respective tribe in Congress. The consequence of that is they have to give up the hard work of governing, because compromise is a sure way to disappoint the activists, where the easy money and the votes come from, and cooperation is a sure way to be completely ignored by the media. So the incentives of the political class only serve to reinforce the kind of dysfunctional behavior that we see nowadays. Where's the public on this? Well, most of the public is concentrated on the daily affairs of life, leisure, playing Angry Birds, going to work. We're not caught up in this sort of partisan warfare the political class is. Morris Fiorina is a political scientist who showed that over the last 30 years, the partisan or ideological self-identification of the public has not changed very much. It's our choices that have. So the question is, how do we go from a system like this, divided between us and them, a system that is made to benefit the political class, and return to the kind of we government that was so crucial and part of our founding? I think the first part is that we need to put in place a series of structural political reforms. We probably need campaign finance reform to end the system of legalized bribery that exists today. We probably need redistricting reform so that the people are choosing their leaders and not the other way around. And we also probably need congressional reform to ensure a productive rather than paralyzed legislative process. But the difficulty with these is that they all rely on working within an already broken system of misaligned incentives and self-interested politicians to be enacted. And that's why none of them have made significant progress, since people have been calling for this for years now. That's the true potential, I think, a new movement called Americans Elect holds. It's working outside of the two-party system, outside of the system in Washington, to enact change by holding the first ever online convention to nominate a third ticket for president and vice president in this year's presidential election. To this online convention, any registered voter can become a delegate, and anyone who's constitutionally qualified to be president can seek the nomination. It's a technological and political innovation that promises to deliver the kind of shock therapy that the system probably needs nowadays. And it doesn't require anyone's permission. All it requires is your participation in the process. The benefit is, through a system like this, it expands the pool of candidates to those who otherwise wouldn't run through the circus of either party's primary, and it allows the candidates to campaign to the general public, not to the base of either particular party, in order to be elected. And I've had the great privilege of working for Americans Elect for the past 2 years. I'm as big of a believer in it today as I was in 2010. But in working on this project, what I've come to realize is that alone structural changes and process reforms probably can't deliver the kind of change we need. We also need a bottom-up reinvigoration of civic participation. The 70 to 80% of people who are in the sensible center, in the silent majority, probably need to start speaking up, which is the great thing about the Rally to Restore Sanity, if you guys tuned in a short while ago. We need to rediscover what Tocqueville found when he visited these states in the 19th century, a network of civic organizations and associations that were the lifeblood of democracy. We need to reverse what Robert Putnam found a century and a half later, which was a withdrawal from civic life and a pursuit of individualistic happiness and material pleasures. And I think we can do that through realizing, again, the civic missions of our public schools. Civic education is really important, especially for young Americans in formative years, to give them the knowledge and the tools they need to be effective citizens. So that, yes, we need science, and yes, we need math, but it's also important that people can actually graduate and become active participants in our civic life. So in closing, I'd like to offer a few thoughts. You know, it's said that democracy is the worst form of government except for all others that have been tried. I think that's true. But I don't think we could ever have a perfect political system because man himself is imperfect. I think what we need to strive to do is to get back to the we government that we once had in this country. We have in America is unique in design because it recognizes that despite our individual shortcomings and individual failures, that the people, if engaged and educated, can be trusted with their own governance. And that's why Jefferson said that there's no greater safe depository of the ultimate powers of society than with the people themselves. But that requires us owning our democracy. When Ben Franklin was asked what kind of government we had, he said a republic if we can keep it, meaning the people. And that requires us re-engaging with the system. And so I think we have a choice to make. We can either let our government continue on its current path of pursuing the narrow interests of the day based upon these divisions of partisanship and participation, or we can demand that it start once again pursuing the common interest by making the first three words of our Constitution come alive. Not us and them, but we the people. Thank you very much.